Mountain Man bought an abandoned cabin for $1. A woman inside had been waiting for him. The Mountain Man had lived most of his life away from people. He preferred the quiet of high trees, cold streams, and long winters that tested a man's patience. Towns made him uneasy. Too much noise, too many questions. Up in the mountains, life was simple. If you worked hard, you survived. If you didn't, the land taught you quickly. He heard about the cabin by accident. One late afternoon, he stopped at a small county office to renew a permit for trapping. The clerk, tired and half distracted, mentioned an old property no one wanted, an abandoned cabin far up an unused road. The county had taken it years ago for unpaid taxes. No one had claimed it. No one had bid on it. It had been listed again and again until finally the price was dropped to almost nothing. $1, the clerk said with a small laugh, just to clear the record. The Mountain Man didn't laugh. He didn't believe in curses or ghost stories, even though the clerk hinted at them. People always made up stories about places they were too afraid or lazy to deal with. To him, a cabin was a cabin. Walls, a roof, a stove if you were lucky. That was all a man really needed. He paid the $1, signed the papers. No ceremony, no excitement. Just another transaction in a world that usually ignored places like that. A week later, he loaded his truck with basic supplies. Tools, blankets, dried food, a small stove. The road to the cabin was worse than he expected. Trees leaned in close, branches scraping the sides of the truck. At one point, he had to get out and clear fallen limbs just to pass. The farther he went, the more it felt like the land was trying to turn him back. By the time he reached the end of the road, the sun was already low. The cabin sat in a small clearing, half hidden by trees and brush. From a distance, it looked like it might collapse at any moment. The roof sagged slightly. The porch leaned to one side. Windows were dark and dusty. Still, it was standing. That alone meant something. He parked and stepped out, listening. The mountains were quiet in a way that felt heavy, like the air itself was holding its breath. No birds, no wind, just stillness. He walked around the cabin slowly, checking the structure. The wood was old but solid in places. Someone had patched parts of the wall long after it should have been abandoned. That caught his attention. If no one had been there for decades, why were there newer boards? He shrugged it off. Maybe hunters, maybe kids. People passed through places all the time. Then he noticed the door. It wasn't locked. He stood there for a moment, hand resting near his belt, listening again. Still nothing. Carefully, he pushed the door open. The smell inside surprised him. It wasn't the sharp rot he expected. It smelled like old wood, smoke, and something faintly familiar, like dried herbs or pine. Light filtered in through a dirty window. The main room was small but not empty. There was a table worn smooth by years of use. A chair pulled slightly away from it as if someone had just stood up. On the counter there were jars, not broken, not dusty, neatly lined up. Food, preserved food, that stopped him cold. He walked closer, lifting one jar to inspect it. The lid was sealed. The label was handwritten, faded but clear. Someone had taken time to do this. Recently. No mold. No signs of age. His instincts sharpened. This wasn't an abandoned place. He checked the stove. Ashes inside. Not old ashes. He touched them carefully. Cold but not ancient. Someone had been living here. He stepped back, scanning the room. There was a blanket folded on a bench, a pair of boots near the wall, small things, but together they painted a clear picture. This cabin wasn't empty because it had been forgotten. It was empty because someone didn't want to be seen. He felt a strange mix of discomfort and curiosity. He had bought this place legally. The paper said so, but paper didn't always tell the full story. He moved slowly through the cabin, calling out once softly to let whoever might be there know he wasn't sneaking. His voice echoed too loudly in the small space. No answer. There was a narrow hallway leading to the back. A door there was closed. He hesitated. Years alone in the wild had taught him caution. People could be more dangerous than animals. He didn't open the door yet. Instead, he stepped outside and circled the cabin again, checking for movement, footprints, signs of a struggle. The ground was hard, making tracks difficult to see, but there were paths through the brush that looked used. Someone knew this land well. As the sun dipped lower, shadows stretched across the clearing. He had planned to stay the night, but now he wasn't sure. Still, he didn't believe in running from uncertainty. If someone was living here, he needed to understand why. He went back inside. This time, he noticed a loose floorboard near the wall. It had been moved many times. He lifted it carefully. Beneath it was a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside were papers, old papers, letters, receipts, documents with names and dates written in careful handwriting. He didn't read much, just enough to know they mattered. That's when he heard it. A quiet sound, not a step. Not a voice, a breath. He froze. The sound came from the back of the cabin. Slowly, he turned toward the closed door. Before he could say anything, the door opened just a crack. A woman stood there. She looked thin but strong, like someone shaped by hard seasons. Her clothes were worn but clean. Her hair was pulled back, practical, no effort wasted. Her eyes didn't show panic. They showed waiting. She looked at him as if she had imagined this moment many times. "You're here," she said calmly. He didn't answer right away. He wasn't sure what to say. "Yes," he finally replied. "I didn't know anyone was here." She nodded as if that didn't surprise her. "I knew someone would come eventually," she said. "I just didn't know when." The words unsettled him more than anger would have. She didn't sound afraid. She didn't sound defensive. She sounded prepared. He glanced at the papers in his hand, then back at her. "This place was listed as abandoned," he said carefully. "I bought it from the county." "I know," she replied. "That's why you're here." The air between them felt heavy, filled with questions neither of them was ready to ask out loud. Outside, the last light faded behind the trees, and the cabin stood quietly, holding a story far deeper than a $1 sale. Neither of them moved. Neither of them knew yet that this meeting was not an accident, but the beginning of something neither the mountains nor the paperwork could ignore. The mountain man stood still, unsure what to do next. He had faced wild animals, storms, and long winters alone, but standing in front of this quiet woman felt different. There was no threat in her posture, no anger in her eyes, only a calm that made him uneasy. He slowly placed the papers back where he had found them and stepped away from the loose floorboard. He did not want to give her the wrong idea. This was already strange enough. "I'm not here to cause trouble," he said honestly. "I thought this place was empty." She studied him for a moment as if weighing his words. Then she opened the door fully and stepped into the main room. Up close, he could see how tired she was. Not weak, just worn down by years of carrying something heavy alone. "I know what the papers say," she replied. "They don't say everything." They stood across from each other, the small cabin suddenly feeling even smaller. The fire pit outside crackled softly as the last bits of daylight slipped away. The mountain man realized night would come fast and whatever decision was made would have to be made soon. "Do you want me to leave?" he asked. The woman shook her head slowly. "No, I want you to understand first." He nodded. That was fair. She moved to the stove and added a small piece of wood, careful and practiced. Soon, a gentle warmth filled the room. She poured water into a kettle without asking permission, as if this place still belonged to her in ways no paper could erase. "My name is Clara," she said after a long pause. He told her his name too, simple and direct. No last name. He had learned long ago that names carried weight he didn't always want. Clara sat at the table and motioned for him to sit across from her. He hesitated, then did. The chair creaked under his weight. "I didn't come here to hide forever," she began, "but I didn't have anywhere else to go." She spoke slowly, choosing her words carefully. She explained how the cabin had belonged to her family. Her parents had lived there when she was young. It wasn't much, but it was home. When they passed, paperwork got lost. Notices went to the wrong address. Taxes piled up without her knowing. By the time she found out, the county had already claimed the land. I tried to fix it, she said quietly. I went to offices. I filled out forms. I was told to wait. Then I was told it was too late. Her hands tightened around the mug she now held. This was all I had left of them. The mountain man listened without interrupting. He had seen enough of the system to know how easily people could fall through its cracks, especially those who lived far from cities, far from attention. So you stayed, he said. She nodded. At first, I came back just to collect things. Then winter came, and then another. I learned how to survive. I stayed quiet. I didn't want trouble. He looked around again, seeing the cabin through new eyes, the neat jars, the repaired walls, the care. This wasn't someone trespassing. This was someone holding on. I didn't know, he repeated. I know you didn't, she said gently. You don't look like someone who would push a person out without listening. Her words surprised him. He wasn't used to being seen that way. Silence settled between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Outside, the wind finally picked up, whispering through the trees. What happens now? He asked. That depends on you, Clara said honestly. Legally, the place is yours. I won't pretend otherwise. I just wanted you to know I'm not a stranger who wandered in. He leaned back, thinking. He had bought the cabin for shelter, for solitude. He had not expected a human story waiting inside. I won't force you out tonight, he said after a moment. It's not right. We can figure something out. Her shoulders relaxed slightly, as if she had been holding her breath for days. Thank you, she said. They shared a simple meal that night, mostly from her stores. He offered some of his supplies in return. The act felt natural, not negotiated. Two people doing what needed to be done. Later, he insisted on sleeping outside under his tarp. He didn't want her to feel crowded or threatened. She didn't argue. As the night grew cold, he lay awake, staring at the stars through the branches. He had come for a cheap cabin. Instead, he had found a responsibility. Inside, Clara sat by the fire, listening to the quiet footsteps outside fade. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to believe she might not be alone anymore. Neither of them slept much that night. The mountains watched silently, as they always had, as two lives slowly began to shift, without force, without noise, but with a weight that could no longer be ignored. Morning came slowly to the mountains. A pale light slipped through the trees, touching the cabin roof and the cold ground around it. The mountain man woke before the sun fully rose, as he always did. The night had been quiet, but his mind had not rested. He sat up, listening. No danger sounds. Just wind, birds waking, and the faint creak of the cabin settling. He packed his tarp and stepped closer to the cabin. Smoke was already rising from the chimney. Inside, Clara was awake. She had swept the floor and placed 2 cups on the table. The smell of warm water and herbs filled the room. It felt less like a shelter now and more like a home. You didn't have to do all that, he said. She gave a small smile. Old habits. Keeping busy helps me think. They ate in silence for a while. The quiet was no longer tense but thoughtful. The man finally spoke. I need to understand everything, he said. Not just for me. For you, Clara nodded. She had expected this. She pulled out the bundle of papers from beneath the floor and placed them carefully on the table. This time she spread them out. Letters from her parents, old utility receipts, a faded hand-drawn map of the land boundaries, notices that had arrived too late. She pointed to dates, to addresses that were wrong, to signatures missing where they should have been. I was working seasonal jobs when it happened, she explained. Moving around. The notices went to the old town address. By the time I came back, everything had already been decided. The mountain man studied the document slowly. He wasn't an expert, but he could see the story written between the lines. This wasn't neglect. It was a chain of small mistakes that added up to a big loss. You tried to fix it, he said. I tried until I ran out of money, she replied. And hope. She told him how she learned to live quietly, How she gathered food, fixed broken boards, learned the moods of the mountain. Winters were the hardest. Snow sealed the world away, and the silence felt endless. Some nights she talked to the walls just to hear a voice. "I kept believing someone decent would come," she said softly, "someone who wouldn't treat me like a problem." The man looked at her then, really looked. He saw strength shaped by isolation, not bitterness. It stirred something uncomfortable in him. "I don't like what happened to you," he said simply. That afternoon he walked the land with her. She showed him places her parents had planted trees, a creek where her mother washed clothes, a rock where her father used to sit at sunset. Every step added weight to the ground beneath his boots. "This land remembers," she said, "even if records don't." When evening came, he made a decision. He told her he would go to town, not to claim his ownership, but to ask questions. "I can't promise anything," he said honestly, "but I won't pretend I didn't see this." Clara didn't thank him right away. She had learned not to hope too quickly. Still, her eyes softened. "Whatever happens," she said, "I appreciate you trying." The next day he drove down the mountain. Town felt louder than before, smaller. He visited the county office again, asked for files, requested old records. The clerk recognized him and seemed surprised by his questions. Most people who bought cheap land wanted to fence it and forget it. He wanted answers. Some officials were dismissive, others were uncomfortable. One older woman in records listened quietly and then sighed. "This case was rushed," she admitted. Back then no one checked closely. That was enough to keep him going. Days passed. He returned to the cabin each night, bringing news, small steps, small openings. Clara listened carefully, asking questions, learning to speak up again. The cabin changed during those days. They repaired the porch together, shared meals, talked about the weather, about mistakes, about how easy it was to disappear if no one was looking for you. Still, the future remained uncertain. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Clara said, "Even if the land isn't returned, thank you for seeing me." He didn't answer right away. He was thinking about how a $1 purchase had turned into something far heavier and far more important. The mountain stayed quiet, but the silence was different now. It was no longer empty. The days that followed were not easy. The mountain man kept traveling back and forth between the cabin and town. Each trip took time, fuel, and patience. Roads were rough, offices were slow, and answers never came quickly. Still, he went. Every time. Clara stayed behind most days, keeping the cabin in order, tending to small repairs and waiting. Waiting had become familiar to her, but this time it felt different. This time someone else was carrying part of the weight. In town, the mountain man sat in hard chairs and listened to careful words. Some officials spoke politely but offered little help. Others hinted that fixing old mistakes took effort no one wanted to give. Records were old. Files were incomplete. Responsibility had passed through too many hands. "It's complicated," they said again and again. He did not argue loudly. He did not accuse. He simply asked questions and kept asking them. He showed the papers Clara had saved. He pointed out dates that did not match, notices sent to the wrong place, signatures missing where they should have been. He asked why no one had checked twice before taking something that had been a family's home. Some people avoided his eyes. One afternoon he was told there would be a formal review meeting, not a promise, just a review. Clara would need to be there too. When he told her, she went very still. "I haven't been back in that building in years," she said. "Last time they made me feel small." "You won't be alone this time," he replied. The morning of the meeting, they drove down together. Clara wore simple clothes, clean and neat. Her hands shook slightly as she held her papers, but she kept her back straight. The mountain man stayed close, not speaking much but steady. The room was plain, a long table, a few officials, a recorder placed between them. No crowd, no drama, just quiet power. They asked Clara to speak first. At first her voice was low. She explained her parents' history with the cabin, how long they had lived there, how the land had been cared for. She described the letters that never reached her, the job that kept her moving, the moment she discovered everything was already gone. As she spoke, something changed. Her voice grew steadier, stronger. Years of silence began to loosen. "I didn't disappear," she said. "I was here, I was always here." The mountain man spoke next, not as an owner but as a witness. He explained how he found the cabin, what signs he saw, what he learned. He said he did not feel right claiming something built and kept alive by someone else's hands. "I bought land," he said. "I didn't mean to buy someone's loss." The officials listened. Some took notes. One man frowned, clearly uncomfortable. Another leaned back, arms crossed. But the older woman from records was there too, and she watched closely. After a long pause, she spoke. "This case deserves a deeper look," she said. "Mistakes were made. That was all, no final decision. No victory, but it was more than Clara had ever received before. Outside the building, Clara let out a breath she felt she had been holding for years. She didn't smile, not yet, but her shoulders relaxed. "I spoke," she said quietly. "I didn't freeze," he nodded. "You did well." Back at the cabin, tension settled in again. Waiting returned, but it felt sharper now. Letters arrived. Requests for more documents. Delays that tested patience. Some nights, Clara grew quiet, old fears creeping back. "What if they decide it's easier to do nothing?" she asked one evening. "Then we keep pushing," he replied. Word spread slowly through the area. A few neighbors heard pieces of the story. One older man stopped by one afternoon pretending to ask about the road but really there to listen. When he left, he said, "Your folks were good people." Clara stood watching his truck disappear, eyes wet but proud. Then came the hardest moment. A letter arrived stating that enforcement could proceed if the review failed. It was written politely, but the meaning was clear. The cabin could still be taken from her. Clara read the letter twice, then folded it carefully. She did not cry. She simply went outside and sat on the porch step. The mountain man joined her. "I won't fight you if it comes to that," she said after a long silence. "I don't want your life turned upside down because of me." He looked out at the trees, the sky slowly changing color. "My life was quiet," he said, "but it wasn't wrong to step into this." Days later, the final meeting came. This time it was shorter. The older woman spoke again, her voice firm. Based on the review, the property seizure did not follow proper notice procedures. "Corrective action is recommended." Clara closed her eyes. The decision would take time to finalize, but the direction was clear. The cabin would not be taken from her. Outside, the air felt lighter. The mountain man didn't celebrate. Clara didn't cheer. They simply stood there side by side, letting the moment settle. On the drive back, Clara finally spoke. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to," he said. "This place matters, that's enough." As the cabin came into view, the mountains seemed less distant. The waiting was nearly over, not because someone had saved her, but because she had been heard, and that made all the difference. The final letter arrived on a quiet morning, carried by the same mail truck that came only a few times a week. Clara saw it first. She recognized the official envelope right away. For a moment, she just held it, feeling its weight as if it were heavier than paper. The mountain man stood nearby, fixing a loose board on the porch. He noticed how still she became. "This is it," she said. They went inside together. Clara sat at the table, smoothed the envelope, and opened it slowly. She read every line carefully twice, just to be sure she understood. When she finished, she looked up at him. "It's settled," she said quietly. "The cabin and the land are officially returned to me." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The fire crackled softly. Outside, the wind moved through the trees as it always had, unaware that something important had just ended and something new had begun. Clara let out a breath that sounded like a laugh and a sigh at the same time. Her eyes filled, but she wiped them quickly. "I didn't think I would ever hear that," she said. "Not after all these years." The mountain man nodded. He felt relief, but also something deeper. The story he had stepped into was now closing, at least in one way. "So what do you want to do now?" he asked. Clara looked around the cabin. She touched the table, the wall, the window frame. Every part of it held memory. "I want to stay," she said. "I want to rebuild it properly, make it strong again." He smiled slightly. "It's a good place." Over the next few weeks, life settled into a new rhythm, not rushed, not dramatic, just steady. They worked together on repairs. The mountain man fixed the roof and reinforced the beams. Clara painted the walls, planted a small garden, and cleaned out years of hidden corners. The cabin slowly changed, not into something fancy, but into something solid and warm. Neighbors began to stop by more often. Some brought tools, others brought stories. People who had once avoided the place now treated it like any other home on the mountain. One afternoon, the older man who had mentioned Clara's parents returned. He stood quietly by the fence, watching the work. "They'd be glad to see this," he said. "Both of them." Clara thanked him. When he left, she stood for a long time looking at the trees her parents had planted. For the first time, the memories did not hurt. They felt complete. The mountain man began packing his things one evening. Clara noticed. "You're leaving," she said. "I always planned to," he replied. "I'll head farther up the range, find another place." She nodded, understanding, but the thought still made her chest feel tight. "You don't have to rush," she said. He paused, then sat down across from her. "I know," he said, "but I don't want you to feel like you owe me space in your home." She looked at him carefully. "This place is mine," she said, "but that doesn't mean I don't want you here." The words hung between them, honest and simple. He stayed, not because he had nowhere else to go, but because this place and this person mattered now. They built a second small structure nearby, enough for privacy but close enough for shared mornings and quiet evenings. Life was not perfect. Weather still came hard. Supplies still ran low sometimes, but there was laughter now, conversation, shared silence that felt full instead of empty. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sky change color, Clara said, "You know you paid $1 for this place." He smiled. "Worst bargain I ever made." She laughed, truly laughed, the sound clear and light. "You gave me something worth more than land," she said. He shook his head. "You showed me that quiet doesn't mean alone." The mountains remained what they always were, strong, patient, unmoved by paperwork or promises. But within them, something had shifted. The cabin was no longer a forgotten dot on a map. It was a home that had survived being overlooked, a place that proved waiting was not the same as giving up. And for the mountain man and the woman who had been waiting for him, it became something neither of them expected from a $1 purchase: a future.